Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am Michael Munson with Forge. I'm Forge's Executive Director, and I'm thrilled that you are joining me today to talk about bathrooms, bullies, and bystanders, and how that impacts transgender, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence survivors. Let me share with you a little bit about who Forge is so that you have an idea of who we are and where we're coming from. We are a 26-year-old transgender anti-violence organization. We are headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but our work is national. We do have some local programming that we do here in Wisconsin, but again, most of our work is national. Around 25% of that work is working directly with trans communities and non-binary communities and folks that love trans and non-binary people, specifically those folks who are survivors of violence. The remaining 75% of our work is doing things like this, training and technical assistance. So it's the heart of my work, it's the joy of my work. So I'm glad to be here with you all today. We have two foundational principles that guide all of the work that we do. One is being trauma informed, both with the clients that we work with, as well as you as victim service providers. We are also empowerment based, and a lot of us think about that when we work with survivors, but we really care about that when working with victim service providers as well. We want you to leave our trainings and our engagement with you feeling more empowered to do well and be respectful and serve trans survivors in all of the good ways that we know that you will and that you do. Just a brief reminder for folks that this is one of many webinars that you can find on our website or on our YouTube channel, sometimes on both. Many hours worth of training materials. This particular webinar is part of a 6-part series. So you can enjoy those other the other 5, we can add to 6. So 5 plus 1, or the other hundreds of hours of work. We also have on our website hundreds of pages of tip sheets and guides and documents. So we encourage you to go to our website, which is forge-forward.org, and it is at the bottom of every one of these slides so that you can easily find it. We are present on 4 different social media platforms, so Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, and we encourage you to connect with us on any or all of those, because that's where we can share information about what's new, what's upcoming for trainings, what are publications or resources that might be of use to you. We'd like to thank our funders as well. This particular webinar is funded in part by the Victims of Crime Act, and we're grateful to be able to do this series of 6 with their support. We oftentimes start with these slides that have this wonderful pink-haired person on it, and they are a reminder to all of you to take care of yourself. Today's content will be, I think, a little bit more challenging than some of the other webinars that we tend to do. It just may be. So if it is sensitive and if you'd like to take a break, it's recorded, obviously, so you can pause as many times as you need to or as often as you need to. And we really encourage you to take care of yourself and whatever that means to you. So our agenda for the day is to look at a quick data snapshot just to get us all kind of on the same page. We will talk about the social, political, cultural landscape, a lot of legislative information in that section. We'll look at improving bathroom access, specifically for victim service providers, agencies. We'll look at trans community resilience, which isn't talked about as often as we should. And then we'll end with 10 things that you can do specific to bathroom access to better support and serve your trans survivors as clients. So again, I want to kind of put out as a content warning that there is some tough stuff that's coming up in the next slides. And we want to make sure that you all have kind of the picture of what is the reality for folks. And some of that picture is really painful. So again, we try to be trauma informed, but balance that with making sure that people have the information that is useful to help guide their decision making and their policy making. So many of us know that the last many years have been really difficult, really chaotic. And that can be true for any of us, no matter where we stand on our political spectrums or on our social continuum of beliefs. It's been a difficult several years. We know that in these past several years, there have been different policies and legislation that have changed, many in more restrictive ways for trans people. And there have also been some positive changes and some amazing responses, in part in response to that negative legislation and the negative kind of chaos and whirlwind that we've all been experiencing. So we're going to talk a little bit about both of those things that make up the whirlwind, and hopefully we're at the tail end of the storm and we can move into calmer waters. So a quick data snapshot. And I'd like to start with a quote from one of my favorite authors, and this is one of my favorite quotes. And this is from Brene Brown, who says that stories are just data with a soul. So as we talk about the numbers, the pie charts and the numbers, these are all related to people. And I know that we all know that, right? We're talking about data, but we're talking about people that make up that data. So just as we can remind ourselves to humanize the process of looking at data, I think that can be really helpful. So let's start out with some really basics, and we're going to go quickly through the data. So how many folks are trans? We know that someplace between 0.5%, 0.6%, and greater than 1% of the US population is transgender. There's a little bit of difference between the Williams Institute, who has done a lot of research, and I think is a little bit more conservative, and folks like Lynn Conway and other researchers who say that it's more like 1%. And then we have some new studies around non-binary youth, where that number is well beyond 1%. When we look at that 1% of the pie, we can see on this slide that around a third of the folks are trans men or trans masculine folks. Around a third are trans women or trans feminine folks. And then the largest piece of that pie, 35%, are non-binary. And so that's particularly relevant today as we talk about bathroom access, because oftentimes non-binary folks are, well, non-binary or maybe gender non-conforming in ways that trans men or trans women might not be. So accessing a restroom when you don't identify as a woman or a man, as male or as female, may be more difficult if accessing a restroom that is marked with a big M or a big F. We can look at some rates around victimization. So just a couple of slides here. One is to talk about sexual violence rates. So we know that at least 50% or half of transgender people have experienced sexual violence, so sexual abuse or sexual assault. We think it's probably more like 66%. Some studies have shown, higher rates than that even, but it's a lot of folks that have experienced sexual violence or sexual victimization. Similarly, rates of intimate partner violence are also around 50%, so substantially higher than the non-trans population. So again, this is data that comes from the Williams Institute and their meta-analysis, and there are many studies that support this data. When we look at the rates of violence across gender vectors, many times our popular culture has reinforced the belief that women or trans women are more affected by different types of violence than trans men or non-binary people. This might be true in some areas, but when we're looking at childhood sexual abuse, adult sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and stalking, the rates of violence across those gender vectors, so folks that were assigned male at birth, folks that were assigned female at birth, folks living as women or as men or as non-binary, those rates are pretty similar across all of those 4 crimes. And the last slide on data is around polyvictimization. So As many of us know, trans folks are oftentimes experiencing multiple forms of violence multiple times in their life. So if a trans client is coming into your office, they are likely to have already experienced a different form of violence earlier in their life. So you can see on this chart that, everything is above 50%. So a lot of people are experiencing many different types of victimization. So this is my nerding slide for folks that like to be a little bit nerdy. But this is helpful if you want to do this with your community to kind of gauge the number of trans folks that live in your community, the number of sexual violence, the number of people that have experienced sexual violence who are trans. So this is a slide that shows the whole US population. So US population is 300 million people. 1% of that, those who are trans, is around 3 million people. If we take 50 to 66% of it, of that who experience sexual violence, we've got 1.5 to 2 million trans people walking around in the world who have experienced sexual violence. Same for intimate partner violence, around 1.6 million people. And 18% of trans people have experienced stalking. So that's about 500,000 people. So again, you can plug those numbers into your local community if you'd like to have a sense of where that plays out for you. So let's look at bathroom bills and some reminders around those bathroom bills. We're going to start with some things that may not seem directly linked, but I promise you they will come back and will be linked. So we hopefully know, all of us hopefully know that when we're meeting somebody for the first time, a new client or someone that we don't know, we introduce ourselves. And many of us introduce ourselves with our name and our pronoun, because we don't know what each other's name or pronouns are if we don't share them with somebody. And we know that for trans people, it's particularly important to be received with our whole self. So as the name that we use, as the pronouns that we use. So that's just a little drop in the bucket reminder. So I'd like you to spend a moment thinking about your birth certificate. I don't know where mine is, but I can kind of picture it in my head. So think about your birth certificate. You have that in mind. I want you to think next about what is the weight that's listed on your birth certificate. So you might have been a tiny baby, like under 5 pounds. You might have been a big baby. So what was the weight that was listed on your birth certificate? So is that information accurate today? Is everything still the same? Do you weigh today what you weighed when you were born? I am guessing not. I'm hoping not, for your sake, because we would have a lot of teeny people that were really dependent on other people feeding us if we were all that little. So some things change that are on our birth certificates. Our weight changes, sometimes our name changes, sometimes our pronouns change. There's a lot of things that can change on our birth certificates. I oftentimes, we often use pictures in our webinars, and I don't oftentimes share data about them or details about them. The photos that are on the screen right now are of my kid when he was around 3 years old, and then when he was about 20 or 21 years old. So you can see he looks very different. He does not weigh the same when he was 3 years old or when he was 20 years old. So none of us have that as the same. So bear with me when we move to this next step. It does relate to what we're talking about today about bathrooms. So many of the anti-trans bathroom bills regulate bathroom access by forcing people, or trying to force people, to use the restroom that aligns with the sex on their birth certificate. So this is kind of hard to imagine, right? Because most of us don't walk around with our birth certificate in our back pocket, or in our purse, or wherever we carry, things with us. So how would this be enforced? So some of these legislative actions are kind of like, how do you regulate these things? But this is where a lot of the bathroom legislation is focused. You should use the bathroom, these regulations are saying, that align with what's on your birth certificate. So a reminder that not all trans folks can or want to change their birth certificate. And it doesn't tell us very much, right? The birth certificate doesn't tell us what our gender is, what our gender presentation is. and where people would feel the most comfortable in using restrooms. So that's the first piece. And what the messages are around anti-trans inclusive bathrooms are that trans people are dangerous. Trans people should be using certain bathrooms because if they use different bathrooms, they're dangerous to the other people. So this is a myth. This is not true. Trans people are not dangerous, not any more dangerous than anybody else. The secondary message that comes out of this kind of thinking and this kind of legislative action is that trans people are sexual predators. So folks that think if trans people are dangerous, well, what are they dangerous about? A lot of people think that trans folks, particularly trans women, are going to be sexual predators if they use the women's restroom. Again, not true. So Mara Keisling of the National Center for Transgender Equality a couple of years ago wrote this quote, and she was referring to folks who were little kids, were in first and second graders. And she said that they're calling first and second graders sexual predators. It just doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't. So when we look at these bathroom bills that are being erected everywhere around the country, we know that they don't, they shouldn't be applying to anybody, but when we look at little children are going to the bathroom just like most adults are to use the restroom and get out. So let's not try to reinforce the messages around predators or around danger by placing that on children or on placing it on adults. So let's talk about some reminders that are true of bathrooms and partly why we don't need bathroom legislation that tells people where they should or shouldn't go to the restroom. So the first reminder is that we have laws that exist that protect everybody. So we don't need trans-specific laws. We have laws that say it's illegal to go into a bathroom and harm or harass somebody. If you go into a bathroom and you assault somebody, that is illegal. It doesn't matter if you're trans, it doesn't matter if you're not trans, it's illegal. So we already have laws on the books that protect people from illegal behavior happening, harmful behavior happening. The second reminder is that it's no big deal. Bathroom bills are a big deal because they're harmful, but it's no big deal to go into a bathroom with a trans person. We do it all the time. We've done it all the time forever. We may not know that we're in a bathroom with somebody who's trans. Oftentimes, many of us grew up in households which had multiple people in it and multiple people of different genders in it. And most of us did not experience anything harmful when engaging in that, the household bathroom or in bathrooms when we didn't necessarily know that there was someone trans that was also using it. The third reminder is from Laverne Cox, who many of you might know from her acting career, but she's also done a lot of activist work as well for trans communities and for many other communities. And let me read this quote that she wrote a couple of years ago. And it says, "These anti-trans bathroom bills are not really about bathrooms. They are about whether or not trans people have the right to exist in public space. If we can't use public bathrooms, we can't go to public schools, we can't work, and we can't go to healthcare facilities." She says, "I exist, and I have the right to exist in public space." So let's look at some of the legislative action, some of the federal, state, local, socio-political, cultural landscape that we're currently living in or that's been going on for the past many years. So these are the things that trans people see. These are the things that everyone else sees. These are the things that are in the media and in the news. So what we're seeing is that more and more, the media is covering trans issues. The media is covering not just bathroom issues, but lots of trans issues. A lot of times what gets covered in the media are things that are anti-trans. And those things, they seep into our brains, whether we want them to or not. We see them, we hear them, they become part of our stories, even though we know them to not be true sometimes, some of the things that are being portrayed. So a lot of folks are having some traumatic responses to just hearing how much negative input there is around anti-trans narratives and stories. And many of us might be having heightened fear. We're more fearful to walk through the world. We might be more fearful of trans people because of what's getting reported in the media. And some of those things may make us question what's normal. When we hear things that we think are not true, but it's repeated in the media, we might say, what is real here? Is what I believe real, or is what's being reported real? So it might make us question all of those things. So the next few slides, I'm going to show you some legislation that has happened, some decisions that have been made on the federal level, and how they might trickle down and impact the folks that you're serving. So early on in the Trump administration, and again, this is not to be partisan, but this is just what has happened over the last 4 years. So Title IX used to have a trans inclusiveness in what it offered to trans and non-trans students all throughout education. In 2017, there were some rollbacks of that trans protection of trans students in terms of bathroom access and sports and some other things that Title IX protects. Relatedly, the Department of Education, also linked with Title IX, decided that they would no longer investigate transgender student bathroom complaints. So what would happen before this was put in place was that people could say, hey, I was discriminated against in a bathroom because I'm trans. And then the Department of Education would investigate that, or it would get moved up the ladder somewhere. What this is saying in 2018 is that the Department of Education is no longer going to look into those cases of discrimination or abuse or physical assault or sexual assault that's happening against trans folks. We're also seeing changes in housing and urban development. So there used to be trans inclusive policies specifically around shelter, so homeless shelter and domestic violence shelters. And the housing and urban development has decided that those were not acceptable policies. So they have changed policies to make it not okay for trans folks to be placed in some of these shelters, specifically sex segregated shelters. And a lot of times these departments of our government are led by specific people, and that those people have the influence that carries it down. So, Ben Carson is still the head of HUD, and he has said that trans people make others uncomfortable. So that kind of attitude is then influencing the policies that he's helping create. So Health and Human Services is another branch of the government which has had some anti-trans things happening through it and out of it. So some of it has been around the religious freedom laws, and if healthcare agencies that might be religiously based can actively discriminate or restrict access to transgender and non-binary people. The other thing under HHS is the Affordable Care Act and how that's playing out in terms of, can trans folks continue to have coverage of trans-specific issues and their bodies if there's some changes in the Affordable Care Act. Those are still a little bit up for grabs right now about what's going to happen with that. Another department is the U.S. Agency for International Development. So there was an appointment of an anti-transgender activist to the gender equality post. And so you'd think that gender equality, to have a post with that would be really inclusive of all genders of people. And in this particular case, this person is anti-trans. So again, what happens when that person is making policy developments? What happens when she's representing folks and pushing out messages to the world? We have seen an increase in violence over the past many years. So in 2017, there was a surge in anti-LGBT violence. And then if we look at what goes beyond that from 2018 to 2019, we can look at what the FBI knows. And I want to be really clear that there are many, many, many crimes that are never reported to law enforcement that are hate motivated. And very few law enforcement agencies actually push that that data around hate crimes to the FBI. So we've got a dramatic underreporting. But of what is reported, we've seen that the FBI has reported that there's a 20% increase in bias based on gender identity between 2018 and 2019. So that's a profound increase based on gender identity. And again, I want to be clear that I am not trying to be partisan. I'm not trying to pull into politics, but right now we live in a world which is very red and blue, and people have different belief sets, oftentimes based on their political affiliation or on their religious affiliation. So this slide is from the Public Religion Research Institute, who in 2017 asked folks about their beliefs around transgender issues and bathroom bills. And when you look at kind of the whole composite of Americans, the majority of Americans, 53%, were opposed to bathroom bills. So they were in favor of letting and allowing trans folks to use the bathrooms that aligned with their gender identity. When you look at folks that are Republican identified, that gets flipped around. So more folks that are Republican object to trans folks using bathrooms that align with their gender identity. So I just wanted to show this slide to kind of show that, you know, we live in a country that is divided politically, and there's a divide on who believes what about transgender people and access to restrooms. We're also seeing that on the state level, there are different legislative things that are happening kind of from the state down to the cities. So this particular image on the slide is the governor of Texas, who for a while was working with the North Carolina governor, because North Carolina was successful in some ways in creating anti-trans bathroom policies. So there's discussion among governors and other state representatives if and when they would like to initiate or try to move forward anti-trans bathroom legislation. There are other places and people who are opposed to trans folks accessing bathrooms and accessing services. So we see that there are a number of women's groups that are opposed to trans people, trans women in particular, accessing services for women. So that's not legislated, but it's an attitude that carries forward. We're also seeing other anti-trans cultural movements, so not necessarily just about bathrooms, but about locker rooms or about other places that might be sex segregated. As a result of these things, a result of legislation and attitudes, there can be dramatic and horrible results. So the picture on the screen right now is of a 9-year-old who came out and was bullied and ended their life because they were bullied. So that is really profound. A 9-year-old kid who ended their life by suicide because they were bullied. We don't know if it was exactly about bathroom bullying. There's a good chance that it was, but these things have real life implications. It's not just about, you know, which door you can walk into for a bathroom, but it's about what it does to people and how it can literally kill people. So I would like us to, if we can, just take a moment, if you need to pause the video, but take a moment to recenter. We're going to talk a little bit more about some tough stuff, but I know that that was really tough to listen to. So let's look next at what else trans people are seeing. So we talked about legislative things that trans people are seeing. There are other things that trans people are walking through the world and seeing. So there are many stickers that sometimes people put up. You know, there's kind of graffiti and stickers, and this is a sticker that many trans folks have seen, you know, on the back of bathroom stall doors or on light poles. Really anti-trans messaging here. We also know that trans people are experiencing things in their local communities. So some students are getting threatened with fines if they use a bathroom that's not designated by their school as the correct bathroom. Some school districts are also offering kind of bounties to other students who see a trans person using the bathroom that is not what they're supposed to be using based on that school's policy. Those are really, really profound things about, legislating bathroom access by, literally fining people or giving rewards to people for tattling, for telling administrators about who's using what restroom. We are also seeing a few school districts across the country, not many, fortunately, but a few, who are allowing things like pepper spray to be brought into schools because of transgender students. So they're saying that it's okay to use pepper spray if a person is using the bathroom that they're not supposed to use. And again, those are all in quotes, the not supposed to use, but based on that school's policy. So those kinds of school policy issues can dramatically impact trans people's lives and make people fearful for really no reason if those things were not in place. We also know that trans people driving down the street, walking through the world, can see things. Like this sign is in a small town. I don't know where it's taken from. I don't know if it's Northridge, California or another place, but the sign reads, if you don't know who you identify as, pull down your pants and look. So a really offensive sign. And kind of like, why is it there? It's underneath an auto repair and service, sign. So we don't know if it's from them or from somebody else, but really painful to look at if you were the driver that was driving by on that street. So on another street that you might be driving down, a trans person could see this sign for a pawnbroker and see that it says help wanted, must be female from birth. So again, really, what is that message saying to trans folks? And what is it saying to everybody else about the anti-trans sentiments of this particular business? Trans folks might be seeing objection and pushback and really harsh realities from even within the LGBT community. So sometimes folks call folks who are anti-trans, trans exclusionary radical feminists or TERFs. I try to avoid that language a little bit because I'm not sure that it's helpful to call other people names just like trans people are called names, but you may hear the word, the acronym TERF, or trans exclusionary radical feminists. And these are folks that really believe that trans women in particular are dangerous to non-trans women. There's a lot of other beliefs that are happening within there. But again, it's a reminder that trans folks may not be welcomed into LGBTQ spaces or environments. If we go back and put us on the street again, what else might trans and other folks be seeing when they're on the streets? So the photo on the screen right now is a truck that has some messaging that's kind of opposing Target's principles around being trans inclusive. So Target has made it really clear to their trans employees that they are welcome and cared for and loved and all of those good things. Target has good bathroom policies, and Target has done things around children's toys and how they're sorted. So this truck is kind of objecting to those policies at Target. But what does that feel like to somebody who's walking by that truck? Trans folks might also be seeing this bus that there's several of them that go around this country. I actually learned the other day that there are several buses in other countries. So obviously not written in English, but I was just stunned to see how many places these buses with these messages are across the world. So I know it's kind of small on the screen, but the bus says it's biology. Boys are boys and always will be. Girls are girls and always will be. You can't change sex. Respect all. So it's kind of ironic that it says respect all when they're clearly not respecting trans people's identities. Trans people might also be seeing signs like this. So I took this picture. It's at a local theater that I used to love to go to before COVID. I still will love to go to it because I don't think it was put up by the theater, but it was put up by probably a customer. So this sign says, this is the men's room. It's not for use by women. So I have to admit that I took a picture and then I vandalized and I took down the sign. So, and I brought it to the, the owners of the theater. But this is what people are seeing just walking around in the world. And so that is really hard and really, really heavy. So I'd like to share next a little bit about how public figures are playing a role in sending messages out. And I apologize already that I have spelled J.K. Rowling and her name wrong. I think I've added an S when it's not supposed to be there. But she is someone who this summer in 2020 made some very anti-trans comments. And she stirred up a lot of dust and she caused a lot of pain and heartache for many, many, many trans folks, for many, many non-trans folks. And I'd like to share a couple of quotes that she wrote this summer and then share a little bit about some kind of rebuttal to those quotes. Just to frame this though, the Harry Potter series, I think, was really really amazing for so many trans folks, for so many young people who might not have felt like they fit into the world, because it allowed them to see the possibilities and the magic, literally the magic of what and who they could be. So a lot of folks really resonated with certain characters and with the storylines of allowing that creativity to come out and to be who they were and they are. So let me share with you a couple of quotes from J.K. Rowling. So this one says, "So I want trans women to be safe. At the same time, I do not want to make natal girls and women feel less safe. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, and as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open up the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. That is simply the truth. That is the simple truth." Okay. I'm going to stop for a moment there and say there's a whole bunch of stuff that's not correct here. So she's talking about trans women and using men. She's talking about gender confirmation as needed for certification of realness. There's just a lot of stuff that isn't true in this quote. But these are her words that she wrote this summer. She went on this summer to write, "I've been in the public eye now for over 20 years, and I've never talked publicly about being a domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor. This isn't because I'm ashamed of those things happened to me, but because they're traumatic to revisit and remember." So this is really an honorable thing that she has disclosed that she's a survivor, and I really support anybody who's able to say those things and share those things with the world. So she shared with us these two things, and let me move on to the third quote from her, which a little bit ties these things together. So she says, "That assault happened at a time and in a space where I was vulnerable, and a man capitalized on an opportunity. I couldn't shut out those memories, and I was finding it hard to contain my anger and disappointment about the way I believe my government is playing fast and loose with women and girls' safety." So what she's meaning here, she's talking about her government, being the UK, playing fast and loose with women and girls' safety is around these bathroom and locker room legislative activities. So she's saying she feels vulnerable. She's implying that men are abusers. She's implying that trans people are abusive or dangerous if they're encroaching on traditionally women's or girls' spaces that she thinks should be left to non-trans women and girls. So it's kind of a mouthful, but that's kind of the summary of what was happening this summer. So Mary McNamara wrote in the LA Times a couple of things that are really poignant and true for kind of the response to that. So she wrote, "Rowling and many others appear to believe that gender-specific bathrooms are magical rooms of protection. Rowling says her fears derive from her personal experience of domestic violence and sexual assault." So author goes on to say, during the bathroom wars of 2016, some, including Senator Ted Cruz, like Rowling, argued that allowing trans people to use gender-appropriate restrooms will result in little girls alone in bathrooms with grown men, which is not only denies the existence of trans women, it implies that grown men are, by their very nature, dangerous. Safety is, of course, never the point. Power and control are always the point. So that really sums up kind of what J.K. Rowling was saying and what some other folks are saying, and how the mixed messages come out around people's feelings of safety and the reality of safety. So just to put those things out there, is this is what trans people are hearing and seeing. This is what the world is hearing and seeing. And where do those messages go, and how do they influence our beliefs and our decisions? So all of those messages, legislative, social, cultural, all of those messages can feel really devastating to trans people. And all of those messages, they send messages to the general public that reinforce the false message that trans people are dangerous and don't deserve basic human rights. So it encourages us, again, to take a breath, to take a moment, to pause the video if you need to, get a sip of water. And I'm going to share a few more things that are difficult, and then we'll move on to resilience. So let's talk about what happens when you can't go, literally when you can't go. So we know that around 70% of trans folks have been denied access to public restrooms, have been verbally harassed or assaulted, have been physically or sexually assaulted in public restrooms. That's a lot of trans people. So even if they have not been assaulted or verbally harassed, they likely know somebody who has. So there's a combination of all of that. So there's a lot of hesitancy and fear around accessing restrooms by trans people for many good reasons. All right. So trans people of color might be of particular increased risk for abuse or denial, as will folks who have not medically transitioned. In our world, we live in a very binary world where there's a lot of gendered expectations about how women should look, how men should look, doesn't leave any room for folks that are non-binary. So folks that have medically transitioned and socially transitioned may have an easier time accessing gender-specific restrooms. They may not, but they may. So let's talk about another couple of statistics before we look at resilience. So the Movement Advancement Project in 2017 looked really extensively at bathroom access for trans students. And they found that 60% of trans students had been required to use a bathroom or locker room that didn't match the gender that they live every day. So this means that you've got a young trans boy going to school, dressed as a boy, asking to be, called by his boy name and he, him, and his pronouns. And he is being told that he has to use the girls' bathroom and the girls' locker room. So that's happening 60% of the time. A similar statistic, and one that's I think even more painful in a lot of ways, is that 70% of trans students said that they'd avoid bathrooms because they felt unsafe or uncomfortable, regardless of which bathroom that they were being asked to use. So 70% are avoiding restrooms. And what happens when people are avoiding restrooms? They are probably not eating or drinking as much. So they're not getting enough nutrition or enough fluids. And that can have some serious side effects, some serious health side effects. So people might be experiencing dehydration. They might have urinary tract infections. They might have kidney stones or kidney infections because they're trying to avoid going to the bathroom, or they're restricting their fluid intake. So these are serious things to think about. It's also good for us to think about what those trans and non-binary students, how that's affecting their cognition. If you're not eating or drinking all day, can you think as well? Can you perform as well? Can you learn as well? So those are pretty profound things that we need to be aware of when we start to restrict access to bathrooms. And again, if folks need to take a moment to breathe, to be, those are hard things. So all of this, it's kind of obvious, right? That all of this these things are making trans communities exhausted. Sarah McBride, I'm going to show you another image of Sarah in a little bit, but Sarah McBride said a few years ago that, she's exhausted. My community is exhausted. It's just every day that it makes it so difficult to just move through the world. We've seen too that this is pre-COVID, but many folks were taking to the streets and resisting and protesting the anti-trans bathroom legislation. And what would end up happening is that these were trans folks that were out protesting the laws that were being used against them, were being set up against them. And that is awfully freaking tiring for folks to have to fight for a basic right to just exist, to just be able to use the restroom. So it's part of that fatigue, part of that exhaustion is literally having to fight and protest to try to have some basic rights. So let's look at some implications for sexual assault and intimate partner violence agencies. And I'll remind you about kind of where we started with this, that the cultural messages, the mainstream messages are that trans people are dangerous in public restrooms, and that the secondary message is that trans people are sexual predators. Both of those things are not true, but that's the dominant cultural message. So what can we do as sexual assault or domestic violence agencies? We want to believe our clients. We want to have other clients' beliefs believed and affirmed. So that can mean that we want to really gently affirm the truths of all of the people that we serve. If a non-trans person is saying, hey, I feel really uncomfortable around this trans person, or that you're letting them use this bathroom, we can say to them, wow, I hear that you're feeling afraid. Let's sit down and talk about that. So we can validate somebody's feelings of discomfort and then help them understand why it's important that our agency is taking this set of behavioral actions that affirm trans people too. So we want to support all survivors, we want to listen to folks, and we want to create a safe environment for all of the people that we serve, trans and non-trans. One of the things that we know is that the clients will follow agencies' leads. So if we are in an organization and we set the tone with our attitude, with how we talk, with what our environment is like, other people will go, oh, that's normal, that's okay. I trust this organization and I trust what they're doing. So that's part of the solution, is just to take the lead, set the example, and others will follow. And we want to make sure that bathrooms are not the deterrent to trans people accessing services at your agency. So having accessible restrooms, ideally an all gender restroom, but if that's not possible, signage that welcomes people to use the restroom that aligns with their gender is super important, because we want survivors to get care. We want survivors to come in our doors, and we need to make sure that bathrooms are accessible so that that is not an additional barrier. So let's talk about how we can build a world that's better, build a world that is more resilient, and how we can see some of that resilience in action. And I'm going to start with a quote from Janet Mock. Many of you may know Janet Mock as an author and an activist. She is an out trans woman of color, and she has written many beautiful, wonderful, profound things. But let me start with this quote from her, which says, "Our approach to freedom need not be identical, but it must be intersectional and inclusive. It must extend beyond ourselves. I know with surpassing certainty that my liberation is directly linked to the liberation of the undocumented trans Latina seeking refuge, the disabled student seeking unequivocal access, and the sex worker fighting to make her living safely. So she's talking about those intersections. And so what we're going to share next is really about those intersections and how they make a difference in the lives of trans folks. So we're seeing more and more businesses take very trans-affirming places in their marketing, in their advertising, in their hiring practices. So this is just one example, Lush Cosmetics. They did a whole campaign about trans identities and highlighting their trans employees. You can see there's a sign in their window in this particular image that talks about, my identity is not a trend. They did some amazing work. And there are many other companies that are doing amazing work too, and are really being out about their trans affirming status. Really, really cool. We are seeing folks that are trans run for political office. And that's amazing. So the person on the screen right now is Andrea Jenkins, who Common Council in Minnesota. And many of you might have seen her across the country when there was some upset this summer, some racial tension and just horrific things happening in Minnesota. She was on the front line and a public face of that. And she's a profoundly wonderful person. I've known her for years, but she's just like amazing. And she ran for office, and she's an out trans woman of color. Amazing. We're also seeing things like faith communities taking a stand, and they're taking a pro-trans stand. And we've found that when faith communities are passionate about issues, that it sometimes has a different and more powerful impact than when other groups have that same stance. So look for places in your community that might be religiously affiliated or faith-based, and see what they're doing to uplift and support trans folks, whether it's about legislation or whether it's about whatever it is that's trans-focused. Like we started out with a quote with Janet Mock, we're seeing more and more that the issues are intersectional that we are fighting for. That we're working towards. This photo was taken in 2017. It was the first Women's March. I believe this was taken in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And you can kind of see by some of the signs that there are many different issues that were being presented and represented at the Women's March. So it wasn't just talking about women's issues, it was talking about trans issues, it was talking about immigration issues, it was talking about reproductive issues, lots and lots of different issues. And working together it does help more and more people. We are seeing more and more parents who love their kids, who love their trans kids, who are proud of their trans kids, who are fighting for and with their trans kids. This is a little bit different than it used to be, but it's also becoming more visible. I think there's been a history of trans kids being loved by their parents, but it's now more acceptable to be really, really positive and out about that. We have folks like Laverne Cox, who many of you know as an actor and activist, who are using her voice where others may not have one. So she's being the one that's stepping forward when it may not be safe for other people to do so. I mentioned that I would show you another image of Sarah McBride. So Sarah McBride just recently ran for office as well as Andrea Jenkins, and Sarah is now the state senator for Delaware. And this photo was taken before Joe Biden was running for president. They have been friends for a long time. Sarah McBride was also friends with Joe's son, Beau Biden, who died a few years ago. So it just shows a little bit of the shifting political narrative and who has been there for who and who supports who. So we are thrilled for Sarah McBride and her win in Delaware. And we're thrilled that she's friends with Joe Biden as well, because we're hopeful that will mean something in our next administration. We're seeing other folks, both political figures, celebrities, people that are high profile, adding their pronouns to their Twitter profile, to their Instagram profile. This is Elizabeth Warren, but she's added she, her, and hers to her profile. So it's just another way of being affirming and reminding folks that we can share our pronouns. It doesn't have to be only trans people that share their pronouns. It can be all of us. We're seeing different cities do some really nifty things with their city buildings. I used to have a slide in that I would show instead of this one. That was the first, the World Trade Center, which is now I forget what it's called, in New York City, which was lit up in trans pride colors. And many different cities have done this on their public buildings, their state capitals. This is the Houston City Hall. And this was to memorialize Monica Roberts, who died unexpectedly of natural causes in October of 2020. And she worked tirelessly, just amazingly hard for trans rights. She was definitely seen as a trans elder and a mentor to lots and lots of people. And she formed friendships with people in political power. So the mayor of Houston, who's standing right next to her in this photo, and he asked that the city hall be lit up in trans pride colors to honor her memory. So this particular image is really moving to me as somebody who knew Monica for 25 years or so. And I'm really glad to see that political change of honoring people and having public buildings literally lit up for folks. We're seeing trans folks taking back their power in some kind of subversive, civil disobedient ways. So the Trans Latina Coalition has oftentimes kind of stepped into spaces and I don't want to say disrupted, but have made a splash with things like the signs like "We Are Dying" that's being held right now, or right above in that slide. So this was one of the presidential debates early on, probably 2018 it would have been, where Trans Latina Coalition moved in and reminded us all on national TV, as well as those who were in that audience, that trans lives matter and that folks are dying from anti-trans bias and prejudice. So another thing that we're seeing that's resilient and positive are things that are happening in mainstream magazines. So, when I was a kid, Glamour magazine was this, kind of shishi, like hyper feminine magazine, kind of like Cosmo and some of the other ones. Nothing bad about the shishi and froofy, but like it was just really, really hyper feminine. And I would have never, ever, ever thought that Glamour would have trans issues in it, let alone talk about trans people and bathrooms. So like this quote that's in Glamour magazine, I think it was in 2019, says transgender women need to pee like everyone else, yet anti-transgender bathroom ads portray us as only seeking access in order to prey on non-trans women and girls. This isn't just untrue, but it is also incredibly insulting. So this is in Glamour magazine, right? So it's making public, it's in public spaces where people are talking about these issues, which is fantastic. We're seeing other celebrities make a difference too. So George Takei and his partner are wearing "You Can Pee Next to Me" t-shirts. And as many of you know, he has got like the biggest like Facebook, Twitter, social media following. And he is like totally down with supporting trans folks and lots of other folks. But this is a great example of a celebrity taking a very strong stance for trans rights, and particularly bathroom issues. So this next slide is really about the resilience and beauty of our young people. So I have blocked out the swear word, but this young trans person is basically saying, shut the F up to people who are saying that there are only two genders, or trans folks are mentally ill. This trans kid knows who they are and is telling people to shut up. So, maybe we don't want to tell people to shut up, but the trans kid's got a lot of confidence in who they are. Kind of cool. So let me circle back for a minute and talk about J.K. Rowling. I think for a lot of folks, they don't want to give up Harry Potter. They don't want to rule out all of the good things that they might have gotten from those books and those movies. And what was fascinating is when J.K. Rowling was talking about some of her anti-trans beliefs, um, many of the people that portrayed the characters in her films stepped forward. So Emma Watson was one person who stepped forward, and this is just one of her tweets, and it says, "Trans people are who they say they are and deserve to live their lives without being constantly questioned or told they aren't who they say they are." And we have Daniel Radcliffe, who has also been, very active in pro-trans language and support. And he's written some things for the Trevor Project, which is a LGBT youth suicide prevention hotline. And he wrote about J.K. Rowling's recent comments in 2020 that we need to do more to support transgender and non-binary people, not invalidate their identities, and not cause further harm. And this last slide to kind of close out the JK series is of trans people really taking their power back and, talking about trans witches are witches and trans wizards are wizards. So people really affirming their gender in some very trans specific ways and some very Harry Potter ways. So, kudos for people that are able to reclaim the joy that they felt and experienced and the benefits they received from the Harry Potter series. So let's shift and talk about 10 free, easy things that you can do to improve access to bathrooms, which will serve your trans survivors, the trans survivors that you're working with better. So all of these things are based on the concepts of micro-inclusions. And just a reminder that micro-inclusions are the opposite of microaggressions. So they are these small steps that we can take to include someone. So on a bigger scale, micro-inclusions are symbolic actions that force us to recall the humanity of others. Those are good things to do. So number one free and easy thing to do is to convert single stall bathrooms into all gender bathrooms. So if it's got a toilet and a sink and a lock on the door, make it, if you can be, an all gender restroom so that anybody can use it. No signs that say one gender or another, everyone can use it. Simple and easy. Second free and easy thing that you can do is to post signs of inclusion on restrooms. So sometimes we're in buildings where we can't necessarily make all bathrooms into all gender bathrooms, but we can help post signage that will help people determine what the best restroom is for them. So like on the screen as an example, I love these kinds of examples because they're really descriptive. So like this one says, everyone can use this restroom, and what's inside this restroom is one stall, 2 urinals, a sink, and a mirror. So it tells people what they're going to walk into. So if someone doesn't feel comfortable with a urinal, they don't want to be in a bathroom with a urinal, they don't have to go into that bathroom. But it tells folks ahead of time. Number 3 free and easy thing to do is to use non-gendered language when directing people to restrooms. So oftentimes in agencies, we have somebody that sits at a front desk and may need to tell people, hey, where the restrooms are. So that person can say, someone comes up and says, where are the bathrooms? I need to go. And the person behind that reception desk can say, the men's bathroom is down the hall to the right. The women's bathroom is down the hall to the left. And there's an all gender bathroom way at the end of the hallway. And that's all you need to say. And then it lets that person decide what bathroom they're going to use. And they have all the options available to them because you've told them all the options. Number 4, free and easy thing to do. Maybe not totally free, depending on what your current environment is, but is to look at what is in your bathroom. So many times sexual assault and domestic violence agencies have a little bit more socially constructed, feminine oriented bathrooms, not always, but sometimes. So what's the color theme? What's the art on the wall? What is, what does it smell like? And can those bathrooms be more neutral? probably helps everybody to have it be a little bit more neutral around scent for those who are sensitive around that, but like how can we make it more welcoming to everyone? The fifth free and easy thing that you can do is to offer accompaniment. So sometimes we are working in buildings that have bathrooms that are down the hallway, that are not within our own office space. And that might feel uncomfortable for folks, especially if those bathrooms are gendered in a binary way. We can say to somebody, our client that we're working with, hey, if you need to go to the bathroom and you'd like me to, walk down the hallway with you, I'll walk down the hallway, I'll stand outside, and then we'll walk back together. And it offers people a feeling of safety, that someone's literally has their back when they need to use the restroom and might not feel safe or comfortable doing so. The sixth free and easy thing that you can do is to know your rights and to know trans folks' rights. So this might be some of the things that we talked about early on about what federal or state or local legislation is. It might be important, it is important, I think, to know what like the Department of Justice says about shelter and access for folks of any gender. So we need to know what those rights are so that we can make sure that we can advocate for our clients who might be discriminated against. So this applies to bathrooms, but it applies to shelter and support groups and a lot of other services that our trans clients may want and need access to. The seventh piece that's free and easy is to publicly oppose anti-trans efforts. So a few years ago, many domestic violence groups did one of those, sign-on letters that you could keep on, signing one group on after another, that literally was about the anti-trans bathroom bans and trying to change that course. So there are things that we can do that are free, that like signing on to a letter or a position statement that we can use. I know that we have to be careful sometimes if we're a nonprofit organization and we can't lobby, to be careful around those, when are we lobbying versus when are we supporting an issue. So there are many ways that we can support things, showing up with our bodies or signing a letter, lots of ways that we can do that. The eighth free and easy thing to do, and it may not be as easy as some of the other ones, just because of logistical issues, is that we can partner with trans organizations. The easy part is partnering, but sometimes those take a little bit more work to actually do that partnership. So on the screen, I love this image because it's an event that we hosted a couple of years ago for Transgender Day of Remembrance. And we work really hard to work within our Wisconsin community to engage with folks of different types of organizations. So we have an all women's college on it. We have an erotic boutique, someone that sells trans affirming toys. We've got the Wisconsin Sexual Assault Coalition, lots of different organizations that came together and partnered together around an issue that was focusing on violence. So we can go both ways. We can have non-trans organizations partnering with trans organizations about trans kind of programming, and we can have trans organizations or trans people working with anti-violence organizations focused on anti-violence issues. Goes both ways, and it benefits everyone. Number 9, free and easy thing to do is that we can be gentle and kind to people that may not get it as well as we do. So if you're listening to this webinar, you've got more of an understanding than maybe your coworker does, or maybe your clients do. So how can we help share with them information that they may not understand right now, but they can understand with a little bit of conversation or a little bit of encouragement. So let's be kind when we do that, rather than, we can do the kind of call in versus calling out. We can have conversations instead of accusations. So let's find ways to do that really gently. And the number 10 free and easy thing to do is to see and affirm resilience. So we've talked a lot today about how hard it is for so many trans folks to walk through the world, to be in this world, to see things that are really painful, oftentimes on a daily basis. And I hope that you also saw a little bit about how resilient trans folks are. Trans youth, trans adults, folks are resilient. So how do we see and notice those things? Do we see and notice those things? Can we look for things in our trans clients that are resilient? And then how can we affirm that? So in a pre-COVID world, we might reach out and consensually touch someone. I love this photo. That's just, it feels so compassionate and resilient, and like, I get you and I see you. How can we do that in our COVID world that doesn't involve in-person connection? But there are lots of ways that we can do it, and it's so individual how we personally want to share that we can see someone's resilience. But it's so important to say and express that we see people for who they are, the beauty of who they are, and how resilient they are and that they can be, and how we're there for them. So those are the 10 free and hopefully fairly easy things that you can do to make a difference around better serving your clients, specifically around bathroom access issues. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can email me, which is always the best way to reach me. And that email address is on the screen right now. So mmunson@forge-forward.org. And you can also find us on our website, which I believe I mentioned at the beginning, and it's been on every single slide, which is forge-forward.org. We are always appreciative for folks that take the time to learn more about trans folks, about trans survivors, about issues that might not be automatically comfortable, and to take that deep dive with us. So thank you for being here today, and please reach out to us if you'd like to have deeper conversations.